to the Checkered Flag Podcast. I'm co-host Drew, joined here with Nate. We'll be talking about the checkers and wreckers of Martinsville Speedway. But before we dive into all the action that happened on the racetrack, let's start off with the winner, Chase Elliott. How about that pit call?
Hey, man, Chase Elliott, he had a great pit call to finish off that race. You know, Denny was dominating. Won stage one, won stage two, led over 200 laps. And Chase Elliott comes up there right at the end, swipes that rug right out under Denny's feet, and gets that win. Big win for Chevy, big win for Hendrick. And
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's good to see the bow ties back in the lead.
Yeah, no doubt. And I will say, we saw the tire wear, the tire fall off that happened with this short track package that we have. I mean, we've seen it last year with Bristol, saw it with Richmond, Martinsville last year. Tire wear was going to be the main factor. It wasn't about brakes. It wasn't about, the overall grip of the track. It was tire wear. And we saw that. And that's why Alan Gustafson made the call to bring Chase Elliott down to pit road before the cycle actually started. Because here's the thing, Chase Elliott had a great Saturday with practice and qualifying. I mean, he qualified 10th, but had one of the best cars in practice. But when the race started, he fell back a little bit and was stuck in that top 10, top 15 area throughout the first two stages. So, we knew Chase Elliott had a good car. He just needed to get the track position. And Alan Gustafson made a risky call to bring him in early on pit road. I knew it was going to be a two-tire stop because, you can't do 140 laps on these tires. And the fact that, after the cycle ended, Chase Elliott was in front, leading the field, had like a 4-second gap to Denny Hamlin. So you saw how much of a impact that tire wear happened. And great call. Caution came out at the right time. Chase Elliott had the track position, stole the win away. But, how about another gutsy call? Ross Chastain, I don't think that one fared too well. He kind of fell back.
Yeah, obviously they had to do what they had to do. I mean, Trackhouse has had zero speed recently. I mean, you got SVG. He finished, I think, just outside the top 10 today. Right there in 11th place. Then Ross drops back to 16th. I mean, still not the speed we want to see out of Trackhouse. I mean, they've kind of been running at best top 15. I mean, other than that, not really anything to write home about with Trackhouse lately. I mean, I feel like it's kind of one of those things where I think the announcers talk about it a lot. You kind of just got to do the opposite of whatever the race leaders are doing. And I think that was kind of the call that they made there. Ross came into pit or didn't come into pit when everybody else was, and, put him in a good track position for a short amount of time. But I mean, just like what you were saying, the tire wear really shows it. He just kept dropping back and back and back. And, before you know it, he was in 16th place outside the top 15. And on top of that, it was just like, he was just blocking. I don't know if you saw at the end of the race there where that big gap in front of Ross, he was just, holding up the freight train at the end of the day. And it just showed how much slower he was on those older tires.
Yeah, it was crazy to see because there was a 5-second gap from, I believe it was Christopher Bell all the way to where Kyle Larson was battling Ross Chastain on an open track right there. I mean, Chastain, you know how Martinsville is if you have a car that's slower in front of you, you're going to stack up the field behind you. And we saw that. As soon as Larson got by, then Hendrick got by, Barry, SVG, and then Chastain just continued to plummet. And I will say, I wouldn't have minded 2 tires there rather than staying out. I mean, you still would have gotten a lot of spots, but you also would still had a fresh pair of tires on your car. But obviously, like you mentioned, got to do something that the leader isn't, and they tried it, didn't work. But that's typically what we see out of Ross Chastain. He makes the risky moves and, tries to do things that the leader doesn't to gain an advantage and, beat out the competition. But, it just unfortunately didn't work today. But, some other notable finishers today, I know that when we're looking at the top 10, it's either a powerhouse organization or a powerhouse affiliate. Josh Berry running 10th, Penske affiliate. But we had the main 3. We had Hendrick, 1, 5, and 9. You had Joe Gibbs at number 2, 4, and 7. And then you had Penske at 3, 6, and 8. But shout out Penske. Great bounce back week for them. I know Logano was, running 30th the entire race last week at Darlington. Hendrick was top 20. Didn't really have the speed that Blaney did, and we get to see a top 10 out of all 3 of them. What a great bounce back for them. But is there anyone else that's sticking out to you?
So for me, I mean, not many people outside the top or inside the top 10. I guess outside the top 10, you got Ryan Preece that finished up there in a solid 12th position. I mean, SVG back up there, finishing at an oval again, doing well. It seems like he's performing a little bit better at certain oval tracks. Others, he's kind of looks like a shade of his old self. But finishes 11th today. It qualified well. I think he qualified. Did he qualify in the top five? Is that what we talked
Yep.
about earlier?
Best
Yeah. So I mean
qualifying
that
on an oval.
yeah, so I mean, good to see out of SVG. I feel like these shorter tracks kind of cater to him and his style of racing more, just because of the fact, there's more shifting going on. There's more break, trying to dive into the corners a little bit deeper, and that's where we see his skill set really perform super well at those road courses. So I wonder if that's not helping him at these shorter track style racetracks.
Yeah, and I will say, SVG, I feel like Martinsville has been his best oval since he started in the Cup Series. I mean, he didn't have like the best finishes, but I believe, he was running top 10 at certain points. So this is definitely right up his alley in terms of, how the car drives. And we saw that at Bowman Gray before the season kicked off. He was leading laps, running up front before, everything happened with the Snowman Gray fiasco. But, this is one of his better tracks, and it's really good to see him get a top 12 finish and, keeps himself in the playoffs at this point. We're 7 races in. We would think after Coda, Atlanta and Daytona, the tracks where, SVG is capable of winning, we'd see a plummet. We'd see him just drop to like 20th, 22nd in points, but he's continued to kind of flex between that 10th and 16th position. So, it's really good to see SVG kind of, adapting really well to these ovals, and he's definitely going to keep improving as the year goes by. But, one person you do not see up in the top 15 is Bubba Wallace. And I kind of want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about that first because what was that bonehead move that he made? I know, trust me, it's a hurricane around Carson Hocevar, but you can't be the one that, pummels him into the corner and then just throttle up and take him out of the corner and, wreck out half the field. Like, that's an ARCA mistake right there. What was Bubba Wallace thinking?
Yeah, I mean, he said on the during the race interview that he did after he got out of the infield care center, it sounded like he made a mistake. To me, it just doesn't look like he's a veteran driver. He's been in this sport long enough to realize how the car drives, especially at tracks like this. Uh, I don't think that was a mistake. I think Carson Hocevar pissed him off. It's something he tends to do pretty often, which doesn't surprise me. They call him the Hurricane for a reason. He's not a just regular thunderstorm. He's a hurricane. He's in there to cause drama. He's in there to cause trouble, and he's in there to stir the pot. And I mean, that's kind of what we've seen out of Carson Hocevar, his entire career so far. And, not surprised to see that Bubba got upset with him. In my opinion, obviously he said he didn't. I think that's just a cover up to like kind of, get the media off of it and not talking about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Carson did something and just didn't catch it on the broadcast. We might hear about it soon. I'm excited, not or I guess excited isn't necessarily the word. I'm interested to see what ends up coming to that situation.
Yeah, and with Bubba Wallace, I mean, I remember he mentioned in that interview that Hocevar may have forced a 3 wide move right at the beginning of a restart or maybe earlier in the race. Typical Martinsville fashion, you're going to rub a couple fenders if you go 3 wide into the corner or exiting a corner. So, I can understand where Bubba Wallace is coming from, but at the same time, it's just an average temper that you would see at a track like Martinsville. Short track tempers are what we call it, and we've seen that many, many, many times. So, this wasn't just kind of like a fluke event. We see people kind of lose their cool at Martinsville, and Bubba Wallace obviously overstepped his boundaries and took out a lot of cars in the back of the pack. Obviously weren't in winning contention, but still wanted to finish the race, and saw guys like Riley Herbst and Zane Smith completely taken out of the race. So it was unfortunate for those guys, but I feel bad for Denny Hamlin, man. I mean,
Yeah,
finally, out of the big four between Bell, Byron, Hamlin, and Blaney, we see a different victor. Chase Elliott takes the win, but I feel like this was Denny Hamlin's race to win. I mean, he did everything right, had the fastest lap, won both stages. Ended up scoring more points than Chase Elliott because Chase Elliott didn't have any stage points. Chase Elliott got 55 points out of the win today. Denny Hamlin gets 56 points. So, kind of looking at the points right now, I know that, we kind of have a close gap between Blaney, Hamlin, and Chase Elliott in second, third, and fourth. But, Tyler Reddick, of course, with those 4 wins, way above the field. But good to see those 3 guys still up in the top 5 in points. We're going to see that more and more as the year progresses. But, fifth place, William Byron gets another top 5 at Martinsville. We know this is the expected outcome of William Byron week in, week out. But one person I do want to shout out specifically is that man, Ty Gibbs. There's been a lot of backlash on that man. The silver spoon of Joe Gibbs. He gets treated differently than the rest of the drivers do. But this year, he's showing out. I mean, he has 4 top fives. Is tied with only the other driver, Tyler Reddick, who has 4 wins. Ty Gibbs is the only guy other than Tyler Reddick who has 4 top fives. Tied for most top tens. Not necessarily leading laps, but he has really great speed. So I'm really impressed with the start that Ty Gibbs has had. But then there's Ty Gibbs here, and then there's Chase Briscoe. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a balance of both worlds. So really impressed with Ty Gibbs, and kind of looking ahead, we do have an off week coming up. So after these first 7 races, drivers, teams are going to kind of take a step back, realize that okay, this is what we've had at all of these racetracks. What are we looking forward to most? Where can we use our advantages to outperform other manufacturers at these racetracks? And with Bristol coming up, we're likely going to get a similar result that we had today. But finally, bow ties are not winless. I think this is the longest time since 2018 or
2019.
2019. Yeah,
I think they said
2019.
2019.
That Hendrick hasn't gotten a win in the first 6 races. So, are the bow ties back? What are we thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the first, I guess, the first snowflake in the avalanche, right? I think the bow ties are gonna start to perform better and better. I mean, this is a kind of manufacturer's track. Or not maybe manufacturers, but a team track. This is a kind of car that the drivers and the manufacturers need to show out and perform well to be able to finish well at a track like Martinsville. So I think that seeing how well they performed in this race and seeing that, Hendrick also had performed well in the previous race at Darlington, maybe hasn't gotten the finishes that they wanted, but, throughout the course of the race has had some fast cars. I think the bow ties are on their way back. I don't think they're fully back yet. I'd still like to see a little bit more out of those ECR cars. But the Hendrick guys, we've seen some speed out of those cars that have Hendrick engines. A little bit of speed out of the ECR guys, but just still seems like there's something missing there. For me, at least, just, it seems like all those guys are kind of finishing outside the top 15 every race back to back. So I'd still think there's a little bit to go. I don't think we're completely back yet, but I definitely think that Chevrolet is on the right track and that people are starting to figure out this new nose.
Yeah, and I will say, Hendrick is going to continue to be the powerhouse of, the Chevrolets. We see 3 out of the 4, obviously, Justin Allgaier, Alex Bowman. We've already been through that whole fiasco. But, all 3 Hendrick drivers are running top 10, top 5 at some point during the races, whereas we only see 1 car out of, Trackhouse or Spire or, even RCR and Colleague that are outperforming their other teammates. So I'm not sure if there's just something going on with the team specifically, or if it's kind of like an overall manufacturer problems. But 7 races in, we have seen the Toyotas and Fords kind of outperform the Chevrolets. So, I mean, we talked about this before. The Chevrolets were going to start off slow, and now they're going to slowly start making their way forward, as we saw today. But really good performance out of Hendrick, really good performance out of Penske and Joe Gibbs. That's a given. But, overall, the racing product on track, not really the best. I feel like we've been kind of missing the last couple of weeks. But, what are your thoughts on the 750 horsepower in the short track package?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the right idea. I think that NASCAR has the right plan in mind, in incorporating the 750 horsepower package into this style of racetrack. I think that, the idea was there for us to get a good product this week. I just don't know what else there is to do to really kind of make the racing a little bit better, towards this front of the pack especially. It seems like these cars, once they get into clean air, it's kind of like they're just going to take off like a rocket ship, and anybody who's in dirty air at a track like this is just kind of sitting back towards the back of the pack, and it's really hard for them to pass anybody. So I think, the 750 horsepower definitely helped to some extent. But I think at the end of the day, we still kind of got the same result that we've gotten, the last few times here at Martinsville, which is disappointing. Was really hoping for some, more competitive racing, some more lead changes, not to see Denny lead 200 laps and, see Chase lead the last 80 or whatever and take the win. It's like to see a couple other guys starting to get out there and leading laps and performing better.
No doubt. And I know, this is expected in Martinsville racing. I feel like there's kind of like a gap between the leaders and top five, and there's top 10 and top 15. So this is the normal racing product we're going to expect out of Martinsville. But I'm grateful that, a lot of the drivers kept it clean. Granted, Bubba Wallace and that whole fiasco was really the major incident we had the entire race. So, definitely a breath of fresh air considering how chaotic sometimes these Martinsville weekends get. I know we've seen that in the past in O'Reilly's and trucks and for the Cup Series to only have I think it was 3 or 4 cautions for incident. Definitely a step up in terms of what we get out of a short track, weekend. So definitely something to look forward to at Bristol as well. I know we're going to be running the same tire package, same horsepower, obviously different racing style on that track, but just to see that many cautions come out was a clean race. Glad we kept it that way. But with Martinsville being fresh off of this, we're literally filming this an hour after the race ended, so everything's still fresh on the minds right now. But kind of wanted to talk a little bit about who are we favoring going into Bristol in these next couple of weeks, because next weekend we're not going to be at a track, we're not going to be anywhere. It's just going to be an off week for NASCAR, the first one out of two this season. So going into Bristol, who are your top five that you're really liking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really it just kind of depends here, right? I feel like the last two races that we've seen, it's kind of been the same guys that we've been seeing finish up front. It's been those powerhouses like you were talking about earlier, who are the guys that are finishing up towards the front of the pack. It's Hendrick, it's JGR, it's 2311, and it's Penske up there at the front of these races every the last couple of weeks. So I expect to see something similar at Bristol. Similar when it's like in the meaning is like those powerhouse guys are going to be the ones that are taking over. I don't necessarily know who I like the most. My top five though is going to be Tyler Reddick, obviously dominant throughout the course of this year, dominant at different styles of racetracks. Um, Predicting them to perform well. My next one's going to be Denny Hamlin. I think Denny's got a pretty decent shot at Bristol, with it being a short track. He tends to perform well at tracks like those, so I think that kind of caters to his racing style on those high banks at Bristol. I think Blaney is my number three going into Bristol week. Obviously, another powerhouse team right there in Penske. Seems to have been performing well in these races. Got sixth place today and has been, sitting right there in that two spot pretty comfortably all season in the standings. So I don't expect to see anything different out of him. And then my last one, or no, my next one's going to be Ty Gibbs. Feel like Ty Gibbs has just been a rocket ship lately. Maybe he hasn't been finishing at the front of the in the first place spot that we'd like him to be finishing at, but he is kind of been that tale of consistency throughout the course of this year. As far as these last, I don't know, 5 races or so, especially, um, it's been him, and I feel like him and William Byron are like those two guys that have been consistent about finishing right at the top of the standings right there every race, and that's what this points format's going to reward. It's going to reward those guys that are finishing up towards the front. And that being said, William Byron's going to be my number 5, rounding it out, just because he is kind of been that tale of consistency over the course of the year. And I predict like those guys to really perform well at Bristol.
No doubt. And with how strong of a start 2311 is, this is going to be an extremely hot take, and I'm probably going to get backlash for it, but I'm not going to put Reddick as my number one, because the short tracks are Tyler Reddick's biggest struggle. And we saw that today with Martinsville, gets a 16th place finish. Obviously qualified top 10, couldn't stay up there, fell back towards the middle of the race, could never get that track position back. So, number one, Denny Hamlin. Number two, Ryan Blaney. Number three, Ty Gibbs. Number four, William Byron. And then I'm putting Reddick at number 5. So, definitely a hot take for sure, but just with how consistent these other 4 guys ahead of him have been at short tracks and all the races that we've had, I definitely like them more than I like Tyler Reddick at Bristol. So I'm curious to see how he's going to perform at Bristol in 2 weeks. But for right now, I'm not really liking the short track speed that he's been showing, especially between Bowman Gray and Martinsville. So definitely something to look forward to. But some final thoughts from Martinsville today. I know one thing we did not address entirely was the Denny Hamlin Ryan Blaney incident with about, I believe it was like 60, 55 laps to go. Chase Elliott not Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott started gapping the field. Denny Hamlin was side by side with Ryan Blaney and needed to get past that 12 car in order to start catching up to Chase Elliott before he took off. But Hamlin exited the corner. Ty Gibbs got into the back of him, and Hamlin shoved Ryan Blaney into the wall. Blaney lost like 4 or 5 positions. Do you think that that's going to go anywhere, or do you think that was just kind of like an on track incident? No beef, no anything whatsoever.
I don't know necessarily. It didn't seem like it was, it might have been intentional. I don't think that was necessarily as intentional as maybe the Bubba incident that we saw a couple laps before that. But I do think, you never know with how Denny races. He could he could have just been moving Blaney out of the way to try to get up front because he knows he has a faster car in that situation. Um, and he feels like he probably had the fastest car at that racetrack today, obviously with how many laps he led. I don't necessarily know that that's going to carry over in the next couple weeks, but they are kind of seeming to be right at that same area of the racetrack every single week. They're both sitting in that top 10 to top 5, throughout the course of each one of these races that we're seeing. And I think we're going to expect to see them in those same positions here at Bristol. I don't know that it carries over, but I mean, if I was Ryan Blaney, I'd be pretty pissed. Especially because he had a pretty good car today, was running really well, and I think that you know, by Denny dooring him, I think, or I guess he didn't door him, but he kind of hit him in the quarter panel. I think that kind of put Denny in a worse spot. I know he said he thought he had a loose wheel towards the end of the race. I don't know if maybe that was a cause of the Ryan Blaney incident, but he did mention something was up with his car that just didn't feel right at that last run that he had today. So I guess we'll see going into Bristol, but I don't necessarily see it carrying over. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was just an on-track incident. I mean, you can kind of look back at the replay as they were exiting the corner. Ty Gibbs was getting into Hamlin. Hamlin got a little loose coming out of the corner, got into Blaney. Fenders kind of got stuck to each other. There was a couple like 1, 2, 3, 4 smacks before Hamlin actually put Blaney in the wall and slowed him up. So I think it was just an on-track incident. I don't think there's going to be any beef with that. Ryan Blaney obviously was probably very heated on the radio, but I don't think that it's going to be anything that's going to be something to look out for these next couple of weeks, or especially towards the end of the year. Because these guys are running up front week in, week out. I don't think that they'd want to take each other out to win the race, because that's just a bad look on them, and it's also going to kill them in the long run because they're going to get retaliated. So, but unfortunate for Ryan Blaney, still gets a top 6. Great finish for him. I thought he was definitely going to have a tire down, or at least have a loose wheel, or maybe a broken toe. After that really hard hit on the wall, but great day for Penske, great day for Joe Gibbs, great day for Hendrick. But is there anything else I'm missing this weekend? I think you may have wanted to mention something about ARCA.
Yeah, so a big story out of ARCA, I guess not super big, but I know that we've been kind of talking about Cletus in and out here week in, week out. So his buddy LS George raced at Hickory this past week. I know he was kind of, you know, George is trying to race alongside Cletus in some of these, the super speedway tracks, and they didn't necessarily greenlight George as quick as they greenlighted Cletus. They said, hey, you got to try to kind of show yourself a little bit, show that you're able to race at these kinds of tracks. So they put a couple of races on his plate to be able to qualify for Talladega. I think this first one here at Hickory, he finished 13th place. So that obviously is going to help his chances to be able to race in Talladega. I don't know if he's officially been approved yet, but that'll be an interesting storyline to watch, seeing Cletus. Obviously, he raced alongside Travis Pastrana at Daytona, and he's been cleared for, Xfinity with RCR. And Cletus is also still racing in ARCA for a couple races left this year. I think they're going to Kansas. They were talking, I think it's Talladega, Kansas, and I think they might be doing Daytona again, with maybe a couple other ones thrown in there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see those guys, the content that comes out. I know they can kind of tend to be those redneck party animal kind of guys. Be interesting to see how that mixes at Talladega, especially because that's kind of the telltale sign of Talladega is the rednecks party, and I'm all for it. But yeah, so I'm excited to see what comes out of that, and excited for George getting a good finish there, finishing on the lead lap. So yeah, congrats to George.
For sure, and considering that that was his first start and he outclassed 10 people, I think that that's already a step up and, really good thing to put on the resume. But shout out George, man. I know, we've been seeing a couple of celebrities and icons like Cletus that are trying to get their foot in the door in terms of getting in a car and driving around, turning left for a couple hours. So I'm super excited to see how that storyline goes, and I know you'll be watching it closely because of how big of a Cletus fan you are, and that group in general. So but with us going into the off week, I know we got Rockingham ahead too. So I'm curious to see how Cletus is going to do at his first O'Reilly start, but we'll talk a little bit further about that later this week when we have more time. But that's going to kind of wrap up everything today for Martinsville. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the Checkered Flag Podcast. As always, please follow us on all of our platforms between YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at the Checkered Flag Podcast. We have all of our socials. We've been starting to post a little bit more on those platforms, so you'll see more content creation out of those clips. But we're gonna kind of wrap up, and we'll see you in a couple of days. Any final words?
Boogity, boogity, boogity.